with micronutrients, there's actually a lot of widespread micronutrient deficiencies. So micronutrients are about 30 or so essential vitamins and minerals, trace elements, fatty acids. Today we're going to focus on 3 that are pretty prevalent in terms of their widespread deficiency amongst the US population, but also 3 that are really, I think, important in terms of regulating the aging process. So let's start with vitamin D. Many of you are probably already aware of the fact that vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency is very common. About 70% of the US population is not getting adequate levels of vitamin D, which is about 30 nanograms per milliliter. That's combined deficiency and insufficiency. So deficiency would be 20 nanograms per milliliter or less. About 30%, almost 30% of the population is vitamin D deficient, where another 40% is vitamin D insufficient. Now, vitamin D is actually a steroid hormone. It's not just a vitamin. And what does that mean? Well, a steroid hormone basically goes into the nucleus of your cell and it interacts with DNA. And vitamin D specifically recognizes a certain sequence called a vitamin D response element that's present in more than 5% of the protein encoding human genome. It's a lot of genes. It turns genes on, activates them so they make proteins. It does the opposite. It also turns them off. But it regulates, over 1,000 genes, and many of these genes are involved in longevity. So for example, it's activating Klotho gene. So Klotho is all the rage right now in the longevity sphere. This gene is activated by vitamin D, and it plays a big, big role in healthy brain aging. It protects against Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Like I said, it's a big focus of investigation right now in the longevity field. Vitamin D also activates TERT. This is an enzyme that helps rebuild our telomere. So our telomeres are protecting our DNA and our chromosomes. It activates superoxide dismutase. This is a very powerful antioxidant playing a role in mitochondrial health, and on and on. And so you can imagine if you are deficient in vitamin D or you are insufficient, then these genes that are supposed to be regulated by vitamin D are not being regulated properly. And so, dysfunction can occur, and it's a problem that can build up sort of this insidious damage over time. It's not necessarily something that's going to happen tomorrow, but a decade, 2 decades later, as you continue to be vitamin D insufficient or deficient, that's where, the diseases of aging start to crop up. There's a lot of reasons why vitamin D deficiency is widespread. So vitamin D3 is made in our skin. Many of you already know this. UVB radiation is required to make vitamin D3 in our skin, and that's then released in the bloodstream and converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, the major circulating form, and then into the steroid hormone. Well, anything that blocks UVB radiation is going to stop us from making vitamin D3. So for one, we spend less time outside. We're mostly indoors at our computer, in our cubicles, working. 100 years ago, we were outside all the time. Sunscreen, so many of us are aware of skin aging, like myself, or skin cancer. And so we wear sunscreen. Well, that blocks vitamin D3 production. Melanin, the natural sunscreen that many people have that gives them darker pigmentation. It's an adaptation to live more towards equatorial regions where you need the natural sunscreen. Well, that also blocks UVB radiation. And so there's a study out of the University of Chicago that actually compared African Americans living in Chicago, which is a more northern latitude. So that's another thing that regulates vitamin D3 production. UVB radiation doesn't hit the atmosphere certain months of the year in more northern latitudes. So in Chicago, African Americans have to spend 6 to 10 times longer in the sun to make the same amount of vitamin D3 as someone with fair skin. Big study out of the University of Chicago. That's a lot of time that they have to spend in the sun longer to make the same amount of vitamin D3. Body fat's also a regulator, so vitamin D3 is fat soluble. It has to be released into the bloodstream to be converted into the steroid hormone, and higher body fat actually causes the bioavailability of vitamin D to be reduced by as much as 50%. So that's also another regulator. And then age. So as we get older, our bodies are less effective and efficient at producing vitamin D3 from the sun. So a lot of factors that are contributing to this vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency prevalence. So let's talk about the role in aging. I want to start with a rodent study because, the pictures are so stark. So vitamin D binds to a vitamin D receptor, and that's how it sort of goes into the nucleus to regulate genes. Well, these animals on the left, these mice, have their vitamin D receptor gone, knocked out. Those mice on the top panel are the same age, right there. There's a wild type and then the vitamin D receptor knockout. And then 4 months later, you can see the vitamin D receptor knockout. It's an accelerated aging model. So after 4 months, these animals their bones are brittle. I mean, their immune system dysregulation, their skin, I mean, they look terrible, right? Well, that's mice. So the question is, what about humans? So in order to look at how vitamin D may regulate the aging process in humans, we turn to Mendelian randomization studies. So Mendelian randomization is a way to use genetics to look at how a risk factor, in this case vitamin D deficiency, affects an outcome. So in this case, we're looking at all-cause mortality, cancer mortality, cardiovascular related mortality. And the reason that it's used is because people have genes that regulate their conversion of vitamin D3 into the steroid hormone. Some people don't do it as well. And so it's a way of sort of randomizing people based on their genetics that have low vitamin D. And it's great because when you do observational data and you're just measuring vitamin D levels, the criticism is, well, people that have low vitamin D also spend less time in the sun, they're less physically active, they're generally unhealthy. And so you kind of eliminate that possibility, and it's more of a way of looking at this data like a randomized controlled trial. And so people that have genetically low vitamin D levels have a higher all-cause mortality than people that do not have genetically low vitamin D levels, and they have a higher cancer-related mortality than people that do not have low vitamin D levels. So vitamin D seems to be also regulating the aging process in humans as well. And there was a randomized controlled trial that was done. It was over the course of about a few weeks. It took people that were very deficient in vitamin D, so these are the 20 nanograms per milliliter and below group, gave them a vitamin D supplement of 4,000 IUs a day. That is the upper tolerable limit for vitamin D, and gave it to them for several weeks and measured their biological age via epigenetic aging, the Horvath clock that measures methylation patterns in DNA, which is a marker for DNA aging, corresponds more to your biological age than your chronological age. And the vitamin D supplementation was able to reverse epigenetic aging in these people by almost 2 years after just a course of a few weeks. So again, not having sufficient levels of vitamin D may be accelerating the aging process and making you more susceptible to diseases like cancer, also respiratory diseases as well. So how do you know if you are getting enough vitamin D? Well, again, we already talked about this. You want to get a blood test. You can't change what you don't know. So a vitamin D blood test is one of the easiest and cheapest tests you can do. You want to make sure you're at least in the adequate range, which is above 30 nanograms per mil. There's a variety of studies that have looked at observational data, looking at vitamin D levels and all-cause mortality, and it seems like the sweet spot is 30 nanograms per mil to 60 nanograms per milliliter in terms of lowest all-cause mortality. Vitamin D is fat-soluble. If you megadose on it, it can have toxic effects, particularly hypercalcemia, so high calcium levels, although that takes a lot of vitamin D. I mean, there's been studies that even people taking 10,000 IUs a day for over a year, they don't have hypercalcemia. So you really have to overdo it to get to that level, but it is important to keep that in mind. Typically, for someone who is deficient, 1,000 IUs of vitamin D can raise blood levels by around 5, sometimes 10 nanograms per milliliter, depending again on their genetic makeup. And so you just have to get a test. You have to get a test after supplementation to make sure you're taking the right dose. Really the most important way to figure out how much vitamin D you need to supplement with. Okay, so I want to switch to magnesium. Magnesium is another micronutrient that a lot of people are not getting enough of. So actually, the statistics have changed on this. Almost 65% of the US population has inadequate magnesium intake. So the RDA for women is around 320 mgs a day, and for men, it's around 420 milligrams of magnesium a day. If you are athletic, that number can go up between 10 to 20%, depending on your level of athleticism. So elite athletes that are sweating a lot, they're sweating magnesium out, they actually can require up to 20% more than the RDA. Magnesium is really, it's easier to eliminate deficiency from diet. Vitamin D, not so much. Not a lot of foods are high in vitamin D3. So magnesium is at the center of a chlorophyll molecule. Chlorophyll give plants their green color. So dark leafy greens are a great source of magnesium. A lot of people are not eating enough dark leafy greens, which is why so many people are getting insufficient magnesium. Magnesium is a cofactor for over 300 enzymes in your body. It is running metabolism, everything from neurotransmitter synthesis to immune function to repairing DNA damage, and this is a big one. So DNA damage is happening all the time. It's happening right now in all of us. And our body has incredible repair systems where we can repair that damage so that we don't get a potential oncogenic mutation that could eventually lead to cancer. When you don't have those DNA repair enzymes working properly because they don't have their cofactor, then DNA repair doesn't happen. And so over the course of 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, as decades go on, eventually you're going to get a mutation in a part of a gene that's oncogenic. So cancer takes many decades to develop, right? So you want to make sure your DNA repair enzymes are working properly. That way you don't increase the chance of getting that potential oncogenic mutation. There's been a variety of studies looking at magnesium intake and cancer risk. So one study found that for every 100 milligram decrease in magnesium intake, there was a 24% increase in pancreatic cancer incidence. And this was dose dependent, which really strengthens observational data because you're seeing for each 100 milligram decrease, it continues to go up and up and up. So it's in a dose dependent manner. There's been other studies that have looked at meta-analysis of people and their magnesium intake. People with the highest magnesium intake have a 40% lower all-cause mortality and a 50% lower cancer-related mortality. Again, DNA repair enzymes need magnesium to function properly. So how do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? So unfortunately, unlike vitamin D, which is a pretty simple test, if you're measuring magnesium in plasma, it's not a really good indicator of your magnesium status because your plasma tightly regulates magnesium levels and it pulls magnesium out of your bones to make sure it maintains those levels. And so pulling magnesium out of your bones is like pulling from your retirement fund early because magnesium in your bones is important for bone health. And so much like calcium, if you start to pull magnesium out of your bones over decades because you're not getting enough magnesium from your diet, it leads to osteoporosis, another age-related disease. And so red blood cell tests of magnesium are a little bit better, but unfortunately, the really best way is to really just figure out how much you're getting from your diet, ballpark it. And supplementation is also an option. You want to find supplements that are organic ion. You want to do the organic salts. So that would be magnesium malate, citrate, or magnesium glycinate. Those are much more bioavailable than the inorganic ones, like magnesium chloride, for example. Okay, I want to shift gears and talk about another micronutrient, or in this case, there's kind of three of them. There are 3 fatty acids, the omega-3 fatty acids. And these are pretty commonly, it's like 99% of the American population does not get enough omega-3 from their diet. And there was a study that was published out of Harvard that actually specifically identified the marine sources of omega-3. So this is EPA and DHA, which are coming from fish. This is compared to the plant source of omega-3, ALA, which is found in things like walnuts or flax seeds or chia seeds. So the marine sources, EPA and DHA, were identified as one of the top 6 preventable causes of death, up there with avoiding trans fats, with avoiding smoking, with avoiding hypertension. So these were all identified as the top 6 preventable causes of death. So not getting enough EPA and DHA from fish and seafood was calculated to be responsible for about 84,000 deaths a year. That was comparable to avoiding trans fats. So everyone knows about trans fats. You walk into a grocery store, every food package you can find is 0 trans fat, 0 trans fat. But what people don't realize is that not getting omega-3 from seafood sources or the marine sources is also detrimental to health, just like eating trans fats is. And it's a really different way of looking at nutrition. And I like this mentality where you're looking at what do I need to get from my food to run my metabolism, to run my brain, to run everything in my body, versus what do I need to avoid? Because when you think about what you need, you end up avoiding all the other processed stuff. It just happens, right? So how do you know if you're getting enough omega-3? Well, the omega-3 index test was developed by my friend, Dr. Bill Harris, and his colleague, Clemens von Schacke, back in 2004. This measures omega-3 in red blood cells. Measuring omega-3 in red blood cells is a long-term marker of omega-3 status because red blood cells take about 120 days to turn over versus measuring it in plasma phospholipids, which is more of an indicator of your dietary intake in the last couple of weeks. So you can kind of think of it like fasting blood glucose level is your fasting blood glucose level is your glucose levels right now versus HbA1c, which is your long-term sort of marker of your blood glucose levels, right? Same thing here with omega-3. Well, they identified omega-3, the omega-3 index, people that have a high omega-3 index that's indicated as an 8% or higher had a 90% reduction in sudden cardiac death compared to people that had a 4% omega-3. So that would be considered a low omega-3 index. 90% reduction in sudden cardiac death. Heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States and pretty much every developed country. Okay, so another study also done by Bill and his colleagues, this was looking at the Framingham data and looking at the omega-3 index levels. And they found that people, again, with that 8% omega-3 index, the high omega-3 index, had a 5-year increased life expectancy compared to people with the low omega-3 index of 4%. That's a pretty big difference. And if you think about it, it's interesting. In Japan, the omega-3 index is on average 10%, so they're well above the high. In the US, the omega-3 index is about 5% because people aren't eating seafood every day like they do in Japan. And the life expectancy is about 4 to 5 years longer in Japan versus the United States. It's kind of an interesting correlation there. But what I thought was so astounding from this study was Bill and his colleagues had looked at the omega-3 index in smokers versus non-smokers. And people that had the highest so people that had the longest life expectancy were obviously the non-smokers with a high omega-3 index. People with the lowest life expectancy were the smokers with a low omega-3 index. But if you look at the orange and the blue graph overlay, the smokers with a low omega-3 index had the exact life expectancy as the non-smokers with a high omega-3 index. In other words, not having a high omega-3 index was like smoking in terms of life expectancy. It's just mind-blowing how perfectly overlaid those two populations of people are. And again, comes down to that Harvard study identifying one of the top preventable causes of death is not getting enough of the marine sources of omega-3 from our diet. So in summary of the micronutrient part of this talk, how do we figure out, again, if we're getting enough omega-3? Getting your omega-3 levels measured, you want to make sure it's a red blood cell test. Figuring out if you're low, how do I get to the 8% range? Well, Bill also did some of those studies. They did some randomized controlled trials, found that people that have a 4% omega-3 index can get to 8% if they supplement with about 2 grams of omega-3 per day. And how do you find an omega-3 supplement that's high quality? There's a lot of third-party testing sites out there that do so. I have a free guide you can find that gives you a list of how to find those companies, also a list of some of the brands that I've identified from third-party testing that are free of contaminants and have a high concentration of EPA and DHA. It's a free guide, so you guys can find that as well if you just Google my name and omega-3 guide. Vitamin D we talked about, so getting a blood test is essential. You want to be 30 to 60 nanograms per milliliter, and supplementation with about 4,000 IUs a day gets most people to that status. And then with magnesium, increasing your intake of dark leafy greens from the diet, Also, a magnesium red blood cell test is another way to indicate whether or not you're extremely deficient. I think people that are highly athletic and sweating a lot, it's a good idea to get the red blood cell magnesium test, because you may find that you're actually magnesium deficient. So that can really sort of shed some light on that. Supplementation is also an option as well. A variety of supplements out there that are organic salts like magnesium malate, glycinate, and citrate.